Have you ever wanted to read some good Batman comics from the Silver Age? I have, and it's definitely not easy to find good stories from that era. That's why I've put together this list of what I think are the 10 best Batman stories from the Silver Age. Starting at number 10, we have Batman 113. This comic was published in 1958 and the story is called Batman, the Superman of Planet X. Written by Ed Herron and illustrated by Dick Sprang, this sci-fi adventure is the prime example of the kind of stories that filled the Batman books back in the 1950s. It has alien planets, robots and fantastic creatures, but the most important thing is the introduction to the Batman of Zur-En-Arrh. This is the story that inspired Grant Morrison during his Batman run, and in my opinion this is actually a much better story than Morrison's. If you want to read a lighter Batman story, one that is well-paced, brimming with imagination and all-around fun, then look no further than Batman 113. Coming at number 9 is World's Finest number 71. This 1954 story was written by Alvin Schwartz and illustrated by Kurt Swan, and it's a milestone in comic book history as it marks the beginning of the Batman-Superman team-up that will forever be known as the World's Finest. Batman and Superman teamed up for the first time ever in Superman number 76, 2 years before World's Finest. But if you want to take a look at how their friendship actually started, then World's Finest number 71 is the way to go. At number 8 we have Detective Comics 328. 1964 was a time for changes in the Batman comics, and this one was one of the biggest changes as this is the story where Alfred dies. The new creative team in the Batman comics needed to shake things up, and one of the first changes they made was to remove Alfred by killing him. Alfred's heroic death started a series of events that shaped the future history of Batman. The introduction of Aunt Harriet, the creation of the Wayne Foundation, and The Outsider are all a direct consequence of Alfred's death. The story was written by Bill Finger and illustrated by Sheldon Moldoff, and even though Alfred was eventually brought back, this story is sort of a love letter to the best supporting character in the Batman universe. Number 7 goes to Batman 121, the first appearance of Mr. Freeze. This was a tough decision, because as far as Batman villains go, the Silver Age was not great about it. Many new villains were created, but only 3 became great enemies. They are Clayface 2, Poison Ivy and Mr. Freeze. Out of these 3 stories, Mr. Freeze's is the best one. Written by Dave Wood and illustrated by Sheldon Moldoff, the story introduces Mr. Zero and shows us his first crimes in Gotham as well as his origin. This 1959 story has informed every other version of Mr. Freeze, from his first adaptation in the 1966 TV show to the animated masterpiece from the 90s and even the questionable version from the Batman and Robin movie.
Cool party!
If you're a fan of good old Mr. Freeze, then Batman 121 is a story that you must read. Coming up at number 6 is Detective Comics 168, with a story called The Man Behind the Red Hood. This one is all about the origin of a classic Batman enemy. The Joker was created in 1940, but his origin story was never revealed for an entire decade. That changed in 1951, when Bill Finger created an origin story for the Batman's arch-nemesis. The Man Behind the Red Hood is one of the most influential Batman stories to come from the Silver Age. Without it, The Killing Joke wouldn't exist, and without The Killing Joke, there is no Batman by Tim Burton, no animated series, and probably no Dark Knight trilogy. The modern version of the Red Hood would not even exist if it wasn't for this single story. The art and plot might be a bit outdated, but the sheer influence of the story makes it one of those Batman comics that you must read. Speaking of influential comics, the number 5 spot on this list goes to Batman 171. The story was written by Gardner Fox and illustrated by Sheldon Moldoff, and it features the reintroduction of the Riddler, who had been forgotten for more than 15 years. The story was published in 1965, and this is the comic book that inspired the creation of the Batman TV show of 1966. William Dozier, the creator of the show, was inspired by this comic, so much so that the first episode of the series is a close adaptation of this story. Batman 171 kickstarted the Batmania of the 1960s, and it's a prime example of the campy comedy that was common in the later part of the Silver Age. Definitely a worth read, especially if you're a fan of the Riddler. Speaking of the Batman TV show, the 4th place on this list goes to Detective Comics 359, the first appearance of Batgirl. Many characters were created in the Silver Age: Batwoman, Batmite, Ace the Bat-Hound, and even the original Batgirl. However, none of them became popular and they were removed from the stories in the mid-1960s. It was actually thanks to the popularity of the Batman TV series that Barbara Gordon was created to become the new Batgirl. The producers of the show wanted a female character for the 3rd season, and they came up with Barbara, the daughter of Commissioner Gordon. To capitalize on the success of the show, DC introduced Batgirl in this 1967 story, which was published a few months prior to her debut on the show, and ever since then, Barbara Gordon has become one of the most iconic characters of Gotham, and that's why her first appearance is a story that you can't miss. The number 3 spot is easily taken by Detective Comics 327, as it is the story that changed everything. The year was 1964, and the Batman comics were on the verge of cancellation because many of the stories were nothing but children fantasy, and the art was terrible. Batman was going up against comics like the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, and the X-Men, and he was clearly losing the fight. To save the Batman comics from cancellation, DC changed the creative teams in charge of Batman. Julius Schwartz became the editor, and he brought with him artists Carmine Infantino and writers Gardner Fox and John Broome. They were brought in to modernize and save Batman, just like they did with The Flash and the Green Lantern. Detective Comics number 327 is the comic that returned Batman to his detective roots, changing the silly fantasies for interesting plot-driven stories, and introducing a much cleaner and more dynamic art. It was also the introduction of the iconic Batman yellow symbol, marking the beginning of a new era. Coming next at number 2 is The Brave and the Bold number 79. By 1968, Batman had changed the detective adventures for campy comedy, following the example of the Batman TV show. Many fans were not happy, as Batman was not serious anymore. But all that changed in this comic thanks to one person. His name was Neil Adams, a young illustrator who understood the way Batman should look like. Adams was inspired by the original Batman from the Golden Age, a dark and mysterious creature of the night, and he started doing that in the Brave and the Bold stories. Adams' Batman was athletic, his cape was long and intimidating, and his ears were sharp. This is what Batman was supposed to look like, and Neil Adams' work in the Brave and the Bold comics slowly started to change Batman forever. And finally, the number 1 Batman comic from the Silver Age that you must read is Batman 217. And the reason why this comic is so important is because this one marks the ending of the Silver Age. In one word, the Silver Age of Batman was innocent. Because of the Comics Code Authority, the Batman comics abandoned the serious themes in favor of bright and funny adventures. Batman 217 is the symbolic representation that marks the end of this age of innocence. In 1969, Dick Grayson leaves Gotham for college, and Bruce Wayne leaves Wayne Manor and the Batcave behind. This change represents the growth and maturity that the Batman stories had from that point onwards, a change that actually kick-started the Bronze Age of Batman. Batman number 217 works as an emotional farewell to the Batman stories of the Silver Age, and it's also a great jumping point to start reading Batman. For all that and for being an all-around good story, it deserves to be the number 1 comic on this list. Hopefully these comics will help you get an idea of what Batman was like in the Silver Age. If you have any other suggestions for Batman comics of the Silver Age, then please put them down in the comments, and if you want more Silver Age Batman, I made a whole series dedicated to that. The Silver Bat is not my best work, but the content is definitely good, so maybe check it out if you can. And that's gonna make it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you all in the next one. Until then, thank you so much for watching.